Welcome everyone, welcome everyone, welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Another great rivalry weekend is over with, and another great college football regular season is over with. We're going to be talking about that today here on the channel. Any thoughts on any of the games from Thursday, Friday, or yesterday, please feel free to let me know. Now, I know a lot of people have been saying that the college football playoff needs to expand because for the most part, every year it's always the same teams. But I've always said that doesn't mean that the playoffs should expand. It means everybody else needs to get better and catch up with the other teams that are dominating. And for the most part, this year, that's happened because Clemson has made the playoffs every year, but this year, they're not going. Ohio State is not going. Oklahoma is not going. Now, a lot of people think Alabama still has an outside shot, even if they lose to Georgia next week. I don't think they do, but of course, if they beat Georgia, they'll get in. But for the most part this year, it's going to be new blood in the playoffs because Georgia's going to get in, win or lose against Alabama. But they've only made the playoffs one time. So it's not like they make it every year because they don't. And if Cincinnati gets in, they've never been there. If Michigan gets in, they've never been there. If Oklahoma State somehow gets in, they've never been there. So it is going to be new blood this year in the playoffs, which is good to see. But yesterday we had a lot of great rivalry games. There was a couple that was extremely one-sided, but for the most part, most of them were very entertaining. We had Georgia beating Georgia Tech by the score of 45-0, and I know I said in my video yesterday that if I was a Georgia fan and Georgia didn't win by at least 30 points, I would be mad because of how bad Georgia Tech is, but they won 45-0. Georgia Tech is just pitiful. And you really can't feel bad for them because they brought this on themselves because they had Paul Johnson, and a lot of the fans didn't like the triple option offense because it can be boring at times. But Paul Johnson won 10 games there, and before that happened, they hadn't won 10 games in 15 years. And Paul Johnson actually won his side of the ACC a couple of times. But because his offense was so boring, the fans didn't like it, so they ran Paul Johnson off, and now they're stuck with clown Jeff Collins. So they've brought it on themselves. They should have kept Paul Johnson. But they have announced that Jeff Collins will be back for next season. And then we had Michigan beating Ohio State 42-27. Now, Ohio State has had an incredible offense all year long, and the offense wasn't quite as good yesterday, but they still had almost 500 yards of offense. The problem was their defense, and their defense ever since the Oregon game has been increasingly getting better every week until yesterday. And the bad part about that is, Michigan throws the ball as little as possible. You know what they're going to do. They're going to line up and run the ball, and they're going to run the ball until you can stop it. So Ohio State knew what they were going to do, and they still couldn't stop them. So that takes Ohio State out of playoff contention, and now Michigan will be playing in the Big Ten championship game next weekend. And Wake Forest beat Boston College by the score of 41-10. They have now won 10 games in a season for the first time since 2006. And they'll be playing in the ACC championship game next weekend. And Florida beat Florida State by the score of 24-21. That game came down to the very, very end. Florida barely held off the Noles in the last couple of minutes. And then we had Tennessee beating Vanderbilt by the score of 45-21. Now, Vanderbilt at the end of the first half threw up a Hail Mary. I think there was 3 seconds to go on the clock, and they threw a Hail Mary that barely made it in the end zone, and it was caught for a touchdown. And that's the second time this year Vandy has done that. So since Vandy is just not only the worst team in the SEC, but one of the worst teams in the country, next year they should make the Hail Mary a part of their regular offense because they have more success with that than they do anything else. But Josh Heupel has to be a candidate for Coach of the Year. I don't think he'll win it, but you're talking about a team that was just flat out awful last year. And then they had 30-something transfers in the offseason because of the coaching change, and he managed to go 7-5 in his first season. And I know I said back before the season started that I thought they'd win 6 games, so they were a little bit better than what I thought they were, but still nothing great. But I think their over-under for the season was like 4.5 or 5, so even I had them picked to go better than they were supposed to do. But they were 7-5, but they got destroyed by Georgia, and they pretty much in the end got destroyed by Alabama. But their other losses were close. So even in their losses outside of Bama and Georgia, they were very competitive. I know the Florida score looked one-sided, but they hung with Florida for a long time as well. And their running back, Tyon Evans, has announced he's transferring, and he was their starting running back for the majority of the first half of the season. The second half of the season, he battled injuries, so it's not like he lost his starting job, so I'm not sure why he's transferring. But rumor is it has to do with academics, and I can believe that because I don't know why else you would leave a team like Tennessee that obviously is trending in the right direction when you're their starting running back, unless it has to do with academics. We also have Central Florida quarterback Dylan Gabriel, who has been out since September 17th with a broken collarbone, announced he's transferring. I don't get that at all. He was their starting quarterback. He didn't lose the job. He's just been hurt. Maybe he's just ready for a change. I don't know, but he's announced already that he is transferring from Central Florida. And then we had Oregon beating Oregon State 38-29. Oregon will get a rematch with Utah next weekend in the Pac-12 championship game. And then we had Clemson shut out South Carolina by the score of 30-0. It was the first shutout in that game since November of 1989. And I'll be honest, late in the game with about 5 seconds to go, South Carolina had the ball on Clemson's 15-yard line, and I honestly thought they were going to kick a field goal just to avoid getting shut out, but they didn't. They ran a play and got down to about the 3-yard line, so they got shut out. Now, I said all week long that I thought Clemson would win the game because South Carolina is too one-dimensional, and Brent Venables always shuts out an offense that's one-dimensional. If you're going to move the ball consistently on Clemson, as long as Venables is there, you're going to have more than one way to move the football. And that's why Georgia Tech, when they had Paul Johnson, never could score, because he knew that their pitch was the main part of their offense. He took away the pitch from that option, and they couldn't move the ball. And South Carolina is one-dimensional. They cannot throw the football. They're a running team. If you take away their run game, they're in trouble. And he took away their run game, and they were in trouble. I don't know what their final stats were, but they only had like 75 yards of offense in the first half with like 3 first downs. They just could not move the football at all. But Clemson has now figured out how good Shipley and Maffa are. And the last 3-4 games, they just let Shipley, Maffa, and Pace pretty much just run the offense. And a lot of the plays last night, they had Shipley and Pace both in the backfield. One on the left side of DJ, one on the right side of DJ. That's the way it should be because both those guys are amazing. I hope next year, as soon as the season starts, they start the season with 2 running backs on the field. Either Shipley and Pace, Shipley and Maffa, or Maffa and Pace All three of those guys are extremely, extremely good. If Clemson can win their bowl game now, whoever they'll play, they'll win at least 10 games for the 11th straight season. Now, a lot of people think that this is the best coaching job Dabo has ever done. Now, obviously, you don't think that when you realize they go to the playoffs every year until this year. But they said last night they've got 7 wide receivers who are currently on the injured list. They only have like 3 that can play, maybe 4. And those, for the most part, are guys that weren't supposed to play this year. They just have to play because nobody else can. They've lost their 2 best offensive linemen. They've had their best defensive players either out or injured and playing hurt the majority of the year. There was times this year when DJ and the receivers just couldn't get on the same page. They had games this year where Shipley was hurt, Moffa was hurt, so they only had 1 running back because of all the transfers they've had. And they started out 4-3, and Dabo could have easily just, picked up the tent and said, you know what, this just ain't our year. But he made them keep playing. They finished the season winning 5 straight games. And even though they had 3 losses, it's not like they lost to, Boston College or Syracuse or Florida State. Their 3 losses came to Georgia, and then they lost to Pittsburgh, who's probably going to be a top 15 team, and NC State, who's a top 20 team. And the only one that wasn't a single-digit loss was Pittsburgh. They lost to Pittsburgh by 10. NC State beat them by 6 in double overtime, and of course Georgia beat them by 7. So even their losses, they were competitive, and they could have easily just packed it up and said, you know what, this just ain't our year. And then we had Oklahoma State beating Oklahoma 37-33. The difference in that game was with about 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, Oklahoma was leading 33-31. And Oklahoma State was punting, and former Tennessee running back who transferred to Oklahoma, Eric Gray, for some reason tried to field a punt at about the 5-yard line, and he just flat out dropped it. And Oklahoma State fell on it and scored a touchdown, and that was the final score of the game. Oklahoma State wins 37-33. So they'll play in the Big 12, a championship game, next weekend. If they can win that, they have a great chance of making the playoffs. And as I said earlier, it will be the first time they've ever made the playoffs. So win or lose, make the playoffs or not, congratulations to Mike Gundy and the Cowboys for a great season. And then we had an ugly game. That was Bama beating Auburn by the score of 24-22 in 4 overtimes. Auburn had won 118 consecutive games when leading by 10 points or more in the fourth quarter until yesterday. If they had any kind of offense at all, they could have won that game. They almost won the game even without any offense. They were up 10-3, and they had the ball, and Bama had 3 timeouts, and there was only about 2.5 minutes to go in the game, something like that. And all they had to do was run out the clock and run the ball and make Bama use all 3 of their timeouts and get the ball back with about a minute to go, but no timeouts. On first down, they lost about 5 yards. On second down, Tank decided he was going to try to run outside and get the first down, which he almost did. He came up about 2 yards short, but he got to the sidelines. Bama tackled him out of bounds, so they got to save one of their timeouts. So after third down, instead of having to use their final timeout, they had 1 timeout left, and they got the ball with a little over a minute and a half to go in the game at the 2-yard line, drove down the field, and they scored with 24 seconds to go. Now, Tank going out of bounds cost Auburn about 40 seconds. So Bama wouldn't have had time to score, so that was the difference in the game. But Auburn just had no offense at all, and Bama's offense just looked absolutely pathetic. But they did tie it up 10-10, then won it 24-22 in 4 overtimes. And just like I said yesterday, that if Georgia didn't beat Georgia Tech by at least 30 points, the Georgia fans should be mad. Alabama's offense looks pitiful. They're so one-dimensional, it ain't funny. They don't have the run game they always have. If they don't beat Bama by at least 14 points next weekend, if I was a Georgia fan, I'd be mad. Alabama ain't got no business hanging with Georgia on Saturday. None whatsoever. But we'll talk about that game more as we head toward next weekend. And then we had Baylor beating Texas Tech 27-24. Baylor will be playing Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game, which is why I brought that game up, because if you remember, Baylor has never, ever, ever been any good at football until they hired Art Briles. And then Art Briles put them on the map. And even though he's not there anymore, it seems like they consistently win now. So whatever Art Briles did to make them good, the other coaches are following suit, because it's only Dave Aranda's second year, and he won 10 games there. So, great season for Baylor. And then we had Minnesota beating Wisconsin by the score of 23-13, which means Iowa will play Michigan in the Big Ten championship game next weekend. And raise your hand if you thought preseason the Big Ten championship game was going to be Iowa and Michigan. And then I wrote this score down just because I owe Jimbo Fisher an apology. LSU beat Texas A&M by the score of 27-24. And the reason why I say that is because back before the season started, and even during the season, a few times I've said it must be nice to be Jimbo Fisher and make $8 million to go 8-4 every year. And with that loss last night, they went 8-4 again this year. So they were right where I thought they would be. But now that James Franklin has gotten that raise he's got, and now that Mel Tucker has gotten that raise he's got, and a few other coaches are getting raises, I can no longer pick on Jimbo Fisher for going 8-4 every year, making that big money, because now James Franklin is doing the same thing, and over time Mel Tucker is going to do the same thing. So even though Jimbo Fisher is still overrated, he's still an 8-4 coach. He's no longer the only coach that's going to make that kind of money to go 8-4. So Ed Orgeron ends his LSU regular season coaching career by beating Texas A&M, who went into the game for some stupid reason ranked 15th in the country. Any thoughts on any of the games, please feel free to let me know. If you have any early thoughts on what you think might happen in the Pac-12 championship game, or the Big Ten championship game, or the Big 12 championship game, or the SEC championship game, or the ACC championship game, please feel free to let me know as well. And also, don't forget, we'll also have the AAC championship game, which will be Cincinnati and Houston, and I don't think people realize how good Houston actually is. That should be a good game as well. I just know with the Power 5 conferences playing, that will be a under-the-radar game that nobody will talk about unless by some chance Houston pulls off the upset. But if you followed Dana Holgorsen, you know he's all about some offense, so you know Houston will come in there ready to score some points. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. If you're ever locked out of your house, start talking to your lock calmly and clearly. After all, good communication is the key. And that wraps it up for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.